Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to Go Figure Customs YouTube channel. Hopefully you've been watching the channel already and have subscribed and liked and commented. If not, please do. Shameless self-promotion, right? So far we've done a video series of videos on how to make custom card backs. I did a video on vintage vehicle restoration using a Cobra Moray. Thinking about doing another couple of those just to see if they pan out or if they're good or not. And what else do we do? We did a video review of the APC by Hide Toys. Most of it so far has been geared to customization though, right? Customizing action figures and card backs for your action figures. And then it occurred to me that might not be to everybody's speed. See, most of my really good friends are accomplished customizers because I've known these guys for a really long time, 10, 12 years, maybe more, because I met them while I was customizing. I got into it, to customizing, when I started buying vintage figures, probably about back in 2004 maybe, 2005, and I came across one on eBay, a figure that I hadn't seen before, and I thought it was pretty knowledgeable on G.I. Joe figures and thought it was pretty odd that I didn't remember this unique figure that looked really fantastic. So I messaged the guy and like, what figure is this? Where'd you get this? Why have I never seen this figure before? And he replied that it was a custom figure. And up until then, I had never heard of a custom figure. And this guy his eBay username was Hive Viper. And he was a really good customizer back then. I don't know whatever happened to him. I tried to get in touch with him, I think, through some of the customizing forums at the time, like joecustoms.com. And then I think he eventually got out of it, because I've not heard from him or seen him since. But that's what got me into customizing, is this guy was making figures from parts that I recognized and making his own figures. And I thought that was fantastic. And I thought, well, why can't I do that? And then I got into thinking about that again today while I was chatting with somebody on my Facebook page, because so far I've planned on gearing this channel to people that are already customizing. And this guy on the Facebook page said that he wanted to get into customizing, but he didn't know where to start. And it didn't occur to me until just then that there might be people following my Facebook page and following this YouTube channel that want to get into customizing, but they don't know where to start. Because most of the people that I talk to are already in this and have been for a long time, because they're just old friends of mine. So, using that idea, I've decided to do a video on Customizing 101. What do you need to get started? Mostly I'm going to talk about supplies to get started and not necessarily techniques. I'll throw some techniques here and there, and like painting techniques, I think I'm going to do like a separate video on my painting technique, because I have like a 3-step painting technique that I like to use on my stuff that works pretty well, that I use on most of my stuff. So what do you need to get started in customizing action figures? Now I'm going to preface this video and say this is the way I do things, not the way to do things. There is no way to do things. There is no right or wrong way to do things. What works for me might not work for somebody else. The paints that I like A lot of other people don't. A lot of the paints that other people don't like, I do. But it works for them, and what works for me works for me. In the end, the only person that has to be happy with your custom is you. And actually, you don't even have to be happy with your custom. I've made plenty of customs that didn't get finished, or when I did finish them, I thought, man, that just sucks. That is a piece of shit. And that's okay. Your customs aren't going to be perfect when you first start out. Like anything else, it takes practice and experience to get good at anything. That's what you have to do. You have to put the time and the effort into just making customs and enjoying it. I know a lot of people don't like painting, for example. So in my mind, I break customs down, custom figures specifically, into two categories. There's kit bashing, and then there's custom action figures. Kit bashing is an old term that, like from Star Wars, like the original Star Wars movie, all of the original vehicles, like the Millennium Falcon and the Y-Wing and the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter and the Star Destroyer, are all kit bashed from old model, like the scale model components. They bought a bunch of scale models and they put them all together to make something completely new. That's kit bashing. You're only taking parts off of something and putting them on something else. You're not doing hardly anything else to them. In the customizing community, that's also, back in the day, we used to call that an LBC custom. Or an LBC, lazy butt custom. And a lot of times, this was back when we were still doing the vintage, customizing the vintage figures, when they were really easy to take apart with, all you needed was a jeweler's screwdriver, and it was really easy to swap heads and arms and legs. So, a quick head swap was an LBC custom. It's a kit bash. You're taking one part off and putting it on something and making it something new. That's a kit bash. Nowadays, what's really nice for the kit bashers are like the Marauder Task Force figures. They make any number of 1/18 scale weapons for your Joe-sized figures. And a few years ago, they started making their own action figures. They have male bodies, they have female bodies, they have realistic military bodies now, they have bodies with suits. Soon there will be World War II stuff, and shortly after that stuff comes out, they'll be doing a Kickstarter for Vietnam. So if you want to just kit bash, Marauder Task Force figures are the way to go. And for an example, here is the black suited body with the white shirt and their Theodore head, which is obviously supposed to resemble Keanu Reeves from John Wick. No trademark violations there, right? So let's do a kit bash real quick. So I'm going to take this figure. We got a different torso and waist here. So I'm going to pop his legs off. Pop them on this. We've got one of the Marauder Task Force vests here with a pouch. I'm not going to secure it too well, just doing this for an example. I'm going to take the head off, and I'm going to put it on this new figure. And now we've got a John Wick in tactical gear. But you know what? I'm not done with him yet. Let's add some knee pads. So yeah, let's Let's give him some knee pads here. And don't worry, per usual, I'll put a link to Marauder Ink page at the bottom of the page, or in the notes, sorry. And you can have fun looking at all the figures and accessories and guns that are readily available for not just obviously Kit Bash figures, but more complex customs as well. Now if I wanted to, I could slip on some arm or some elbow pads real quick here. Hell, I don't like the long sleeves. I could swap them out for short sleeves as well. Maybe a tactical, a drop down, drop leg holster and pouch. And that shotgun we gave him that he was holding when we started. Let's swap it out for this M4. There we go. There's a kit bashed figure. Technically, it's a custom figure. It's different than what I started from. Now, that's not the customs that I tend to make myself, obviously. But that's a good way to get started. And the Marauder stuff makes it so easy. Now, if you wanted to get into more complex customs, like the kinds that I make, then you're going to need more stuff. And let's talk about the stuff that you will need for that. So when I make a custom, I do like 4 major steps. And there's obviously smaller steps in each one of those. I build it, then I prime it, then I paint it, then I take pictures of it. And we can add a 5th step on there. A lot of times then I'll card it and I'll put it on its own custom card, and you've seen the videos, or you know that there are videos on this channel on how to make custom cards. So let's start at the beginning. On building it. What do you need to build it? Well, you need parts, right? So the Marauder Task Force stuff is good pieces and parts for basic fodder. G.I. Joe parts, G.I. Joe figures, Star Wars figures, anything in the scale that you're working in. There's a guy here in town, I see him at some of the conventions, that does Marvel Legends scale customs. Not my thing, but it is a lot of people's things to customize those. So you want a lot of stuff in the scale that you're going to work in. And get creative. Start going down like the toy aisle and seeing what parts of figures may be interesting for customs if you add them to whatever you're planning on doing. So we talked about the Kit Bash, and so then that's one type of custom, and the other type of custom is what I just consider a custom figure, and I have like 2 subdivisions of that. And those 2 variations of the custom figure are a straight repaint and a full rebuild. So a straight repaint, I pulled some of my customs out of the closet, out of the display case here, some old ones, just for good examples here. This is my Iron Grenadier. I did him, geez, I don't even know, 2011 maybe, 2012, somewhere in there. This is a straight repaint. This is the, geez, I don't even remember what line this was. My best friend JD could tell you what wave and what line this figure came out in. But anyway, it's the Iron Grenadier figure. Might have been Pursuit of Cobra. Iron Grenadier figure. I didn't do anything to this figure other than paint him. It's a straight repaint. And gave him a new gun, obviously. But that's all I did to this guy. I just painted him. But he's a decent custom, because it doesn't look anything like the original, right? Then we get into rebuilds. So this is where you take legs from this guy and arms from that guy and head from this guy and parts from that guy and put it all together and make your own figure. Here is my straight rebuild, or not straight rebuild, my rebuild of the target. I built this one. I couldn't even tell you all the parts that went into this. Couldn't tell you the base figure. I used different parts for the harness. I used grenades. I think those might be Frag Viper grenades, vintage Frag Viper grenades. The wings on this actually work. They're from the Pursuit of Cobra Skydive, but the part of the backpack, actually the whole backpack, is vintage. I cut it in half and got the wings in there so that they work, and added the rail guns to look like thrusters, and the helmet is a shoulder carapace that you saw on the Iron Grenadier. The head is a custom cast. I didn't do the custom cast, but I don't remember where I got that from. A lot of people send me stuff to work with, which is really nice, and I do appreciate that when people send me stuff unsolicited. I don't ask for free stuff, but a lot of times people just send me stuff to see what I'll do with it, and I always do appreciate that because it's a challenge for me, and I do like to be challenged like that. But anyway, there's like, I don't know, the gun is custom put together. I mean, there's probably 15 parts from 15 different action figures all on this one guy. That's a rebuild. So if you're going to do just a straight repaint, what do you need to get started on that? Well, you need paint, obviously. But before you paint it, I always suggest primering it. And this is the primer. This is the most frequently asked question I get, hands down. What primer do you use? I use Armory Gray Primer. Where do I get this? As the second most frequently asked question I get, hands down. I get this at the local Hobbytown, USA. Now that's more of a small independent, I don't know, they might be chain, hobby supply store. Any place that sells like Warhammer miniature, the miniature gaming figures is probably going to have that Armory primer. The bigger chain stores like Hobby Lobby and Michael's, they're not going to have that. They're not going to stock that. You're going to have to go to the smaller specialty stores, and I think you can get it off the internet. I'm not positive about that, but I think you can get it off the internet. I'll do some research on that, see if I can find it online, and if I can, you'll see it in the notes below. So scroll down, take a look. You may be able, if you can get it off the internet, I'll show you a place to get it here. So primer your figures first. Most people will suggest sanding down the joints to avoid paint rubs, and I do that sometimes, and I'll kind of let you in on a little secret. I don't always do that. I'm not too worried about paint rubs on my joints, simply because when I'm done with a custom, it goes in a display case or it goes in a carded. It gets carded and gets hung on the wall. My time is very limited at home. The time that it would take me to truly prep a figure so it doesn't get paint rubs, I could get a whole nother figure done in that time. So it's not worth it to me to alleviate that problem like most other customizers will, because I'm not doing anything with my customs. If I'm doing a custom for somebody else, if I'm doing a commission or doing one for my friends, yeah, I'll take the time and I'll prep the figure properly, sanding down the joints, um, and then primer it so it doesn't get paint rubs. But for my stuff, I don't bother, because once I take a picture of it, I'm done with it. I don't play with them. I very rarely display them aside from a display case or on my flag, or it goes on the wall in a card on a custom card. So there you go. That's my dark and dirty secret for my customs there. A lot of people are going to be surprised about that, I'll tell you what. So to do just a straight repaint, primer it first, and then you're going to need paint. What kind of paint? Now, this is one of those things that you will get answers from everybody, and everybody thinks they're right, and nobody thinks they're wrong. You know what? The truly right and wrong answer here is the answer when you ask between enamel and acrylic. You do not want to use enamel paints. Enamel paints will not dry on the plastic used in these type of figures. I'll say it again. Enamel paint will not dry on these plastics, even if it's primered first. And primer, real quick, what is primer? Primer is something that helps paint stick to a surface. You know, when you get your car repaired, they Bondo it out and then they primer it and then they paint it. There's a reason people use primer. People complain about how their paint doesn't cover their figure. That's because the paint doesn't stick to the figure. There's nothing for it to stick to. Primer your figures. It takes 5 minutes. You spray it once, then you bend it so you get all in the joints that you missed on the first time. You let it dry for maybe an hour, and you're good to go. Primer your figures first. I used to use a engine primer from Walmart, but I got inconsistent results with it, and it started beating up, and it started getting a really rough texture when I got a bad batch of it, and it ruined a custom vehicle that I'd spent days and weeks building, and I was pissed. One of my good friends, Daniel, he swears by an etching primer. I couldn't tell you, Tankster. Most people know Tankster Customs. I couldn't tell you what brand he uses. You can find him on Facebook. He's very happy to let you know. He'll be more than happy to tell you what he uses and where to get it. But I swear by the Armory primer. I've never had a bad batch of that. I've never had a problem with that. Spray outside. Spray it in a well-ventilated area. Don't spray the stuff inside. I used to do that when I lived in an apartment and basically ruined a bathroom because it's aerosol and it doesn't all go on your figure. And it really upset the wife. So, and you don't want to kill off the brain cells. I mean, man, I've got too few as it is, so use this stuff in a well-ventilated area, all right? Now, paint. Let's get back to the paint for what we were discussing. Again, no enamel paint, all right? No enamel paint. You want to use acrylic paint after you've primered your figure. See how many times I'm going over this? There's a reason for this. Really important stuff there. That's the stuff that you don't want to get wrong. That's the stuff where there is a right and a wrong answer to that. As far as right and wrong answers to paint, there's a brand of paint that I see a few people use, and you can get it at Walmart, and it's called Apple Barrel. And there's a Hobby Lobby might carry it too. I don't like it. I think it's like 79 cents for a big thing of it. You get what you pay for in that. Some people like it and they swear by it. I don't like it. I think it's poor quality of paint, and even with the primer, it tends not to stick. It tends to chip and flake off. I'd stay away from the cheaper stuff. I know a lot of people want to do this on a budget, and you know, any hobby is going to be expensive. There's an outlay of cash for any hobby. You know that is just as if you're just collecting figures. It's the same as customizing them. You're gonna have to spend money on fodder for figures. You're gonna have to spend money for primer. You're gonna have to spend money for brushes and paint. Buy the paint. Spend the money on decent paint. You'll be happy that you did. So the main brand of paint that I like is Citadel paint. It's also often known as Games Workshop paint. This comes in any number of, just a rainbow of colors. The thing to watch out for when you're buying this is they make different types of paint. This one is a layer, so it's kind of like a base coat. They make thicker stuff that's designed to be airbrushed. They make airbrush paint. You don't want to get the airbrush paint if you're not going to use it in an airbrush because it's very watery. You need very watery paint to run through an airbrush. So be sure you look and see what type of paint it is. They also make washes and what's called a technical line. And I'll do a whole nother thing on the specialty paints when I start doing painting techniques, which hopefully may be the next video, right? So Citadel paints, they're fairly inexpensive. I couldn't tell you how much they're. Where you get these, you can get them off eBay. You can get them off probably anywhere on the internet. These days, I honestly haven't looked on the internet for a long time for these. You're not going to find them at the big hobby stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby. Again, you're going to find them in the smaller hobby stores that are for like the miniature gaming miniatures. These are huge with the gaming miniature community. I like these paints because they're very versatile. I can dry brush with that, and you kind of need a thicker paint for dry brush. I can use them for a base coat, which is just the first coat of paint, and I can also water them down and use them for a wash. And I don't even have to do that anymore because they make their own washes too. And again, I'll talk about painting stuff later on, or in another video. But just for basic paints, Citadel paints are a really good way to go. I also like Tamiya paints. These are a little more expensive and a little more hard to find, and a little more harder to use for the novice customizer because the consistency is different. Whereas to mix this up, you want to shake it before you use it. For the Tamiya paints, you need to stir it. So this is one of the pieces of equipment you need. You need a paint stirrer. And they're like $5-10 at your local hobby supply. You need to stir the paint, stir the Tamiya paint. And the consistency can be a little hard to use because even with the primer, it doesn't brush on evenly a lot of times, and I think that's what turns people off to that. And you need to let it dry before you hit it with a second coat. And I like these because there's a lot of, obviously I do realistic military customs a lot of the times. I like these because they do a lot of realistic military colors. There's a lot of different shades of like olive drab green and desert khaki browns and tans. They do a metallic blue that I just really love. And they do clear paints, which I use on my Iron Man customs a lot. And they do, what I'll do for like an Iron Man repaint is I'll paint it silver. They do a whole bunch of metallic colors. The metallic blue and the metallic silver are fantastic. And then I'll do metallic silver, and then I'll put a clear coat of the Tamiya clear red over it, and it'll dry and it'll look like armor, and it'll even feel like that after it's dry. And then I'll do the Tamiya clear over that. So the Tamiya paints are a little more difficult to use. One of the things that has made me fall in love with them all over again is straight out of a new jar, they are like the perfect consistency to run through an airbrush. And I bought an airbrush, got myself an airbrush for Christmas this last December, and I am not very good with it yet, and mixing paint can be a bitch because every paint has a different consistency. Some's too thin, a lot of it's too thick, then you have to add a paint thinner, and I'm not going to talk about airbrush. That's like I've been doing this 15 years, I think, and I just now got an airbrush, so I'm not going to do a video on airbrushing anytime soon, right? But I like the fact that the Tamiya paints will run through an airbrush straight out of the jar. So, yay. The third paint, I kind of like the flesh colors. I don't use these anymore, but these are, aside from flesh colors, but these are what I started out with, and these are the Model Master paints. And I know a lot of customizers swear by Model Master. A couple things on the Model Master paint. Be very careful when you buy these, because the acrylic looks just like the enamel. They make enamels for scale miniatures, like car models and plane models and stuff like that. So make sure you're not buying an enamel paint on accident. Usually when you go into the hobby store, and these you can usually get a limited selection of colors at the bigger chain stores like Michael's and Hobby Lobby. The smaller independent places where you're going to get the rest of this stuff, they'll have a wider selection of Model Master colors. So one of the things is to make sure that you don't get the enamel paint. They'll have them on two different displays, usually right next to each other. I think they usually have like 3 displays. Make sure you're looking at the acrylic paint display, and when you pick a color, look at the bottle, look at the label, and make sure that somebody didn't put an enamel back on the acrylic display by accident. So those are the 3 main paints that I use. There's other brands like Reaper and Vallejo that people also swear by. The only reason I don't use those, and I do use a couple of them like in my airbrush, the only reason I don't use those is because I get the results I want with the paints that I already use. Between the Citadel and the Tamiya paints, I haven't needed to go to a different brand of paint. Other people use different stuff, and that's fine by them, but I get the results with what I'm looking for with what I use. The other thing I was going to mention about the Model Masters paint is they tend to dry out in the bottle really quickly, which I don't like at all. I bought a flesh colored paint just a couple months ago, and it was a solid chunk of like plastic when I got home from Ukraine this time. So, and that was a common thing when I started using Model Masters stuff when I first started. So for a straight repaint, primer and paint, right? And then brushes. People want to know what kind of brushes to use. I get whatever the hobby store has. They have these sitting in a display at the front desk. What sizes do you want? Well, brushes come in any number of sizes. I usually get the smaller brushes because I want to be able to control how much of paint that I want to put on. So there's a middle ground, and that brush will be marked as a 0. So that's just kind of like a middle. And then they go up from there, and then they go down from there. Anything smaller than a 0 is going to be labeled in a fraction, and it will be like 3/0, and that's commonly called just like a 3/0 brush. The common brushes smaller than 0 are 3/0, 5/0, 10/0, and 20/0. I use like a 20/0 when I do eyes. I have a brush that I keep just specifically for eyes. That's all I use it for. But you know, they're Atlas Brush Company. I couldn't have even told you who made these. You probably can spend any number of money, any amount of money you want on brushes for really nice ones. I'll use a brush until it's ruined, and then I'll throw it away. I go through a lot of brushes, and that's fine. That's another thing that you guys spend money on. You can try and keep them clean with paint thinner, but eventually they either sit in the water too long and they get kind of that little curve from sitting on itself in your water for too long, or not all of the paint will get out and it dries in the brush and kind of clogs the brush, and even with paint thinner then it doesn't all come out, and eventually just from wear the brushes will wear out. So you're going to spend money on brushes. The one other brush that I will recommend, this is probably the shittiest brush that has ever been made. These are Tester brushes. Tester makes the Model Masters paint, by the way. These come in a pack of 3, and I bought these and tried to paint with these, and it's just a huge brush. I mean, look at the size difference there. And this is a 20-0 brush versus this, which doesn't even have a size, because it's like, who knows, here's your generic brush, have fun with it. These are about the shittiest brushes that you'll ever see, except this particular brush is the best brush I've ever had for dry brushing. And that's a discussion for another time. But if you know what dry brushing is, this is how I dry brush. These crappy Tester brushes. Nothing dry brushes better than those things, man. They are perfect. And I do digital camo with those too sometimes. So that's what you need to do, just to straight repaint or paint your rebuild. You need primer, you need paint, and you need some brushes. There's also, when you get done, you can seal it, and there's any number of sealants that you can put on there. That's not something that I do. Other people can recommend sealants. I used to seal my figures with like a matte sealant, especially my Navy Seals, because it gave them a real nice kind of like, almost like gritty, sandy kind of feeling to it, which really worked on the realistic weathered military customs. But over time I didn't like how it wore, and like 10-15 years later I didn't like how it looked after that. So I don't seal my paint. I don't use sealants anymore. The only time I use sealants is if I'm using water slide decals, so we'll talk about those in a minute. Alright, so that was just if you're going to repaint a figure. So now let's say you want to take a step beyond that and you want to do a rebuild. Shit don't always go together. So you gotta make it fit, right? So to do that, you might need Superglue. God damn it, just glued my fingers together. How about that, huh? And Superglue, like I said, I fucking hate Superglue. Yeah, Superglue everywhere. Here's a secret paramedic technique when you get Superglue on your fingers, or if you superglue something together. Nail polish remover, acetone. Acetone will take off, will unglue Superglue. Hear all these stories about people gluing eyelids open, or I won't even get into some of the stories that I've heard of people supergluing stuff to other things. But if you accidentally glue stuff to yourself, acetone. It's a paramedic secret there for you. What brand of superglue? I use Duro. I honestly couldn't have told you that right off the top of my head. I use it comes in a pack of 4. I get it at like Lowe's, and it's like $1.99 for 4 tubes of it. I go through it so quickly. If it dries out in the tube, I don't give a shit. It's just the cheap Superglue. I have used just try some of the stuff and see what you like. I've tried one brand. I couldn't tell you what it was because it was so long ago. One brand of Superglue, and it was too watery for me, and it would just like ooze everywhere. So I didn't like that. So find a brand of super glue that you like. Usually the cheap stuff works just fine, and you're good. It's not the super glue that's important. It's the super glue accelerator that's the key to using super glue. That's where the secret is to getting this stuff working well, to working well with super glue. When I first started off, if I had to like glue a pouch on one of my seals, here's 10 minutes of me sitting here holding this pouch on so it doesn't move until the super glue dries. Oh sure, it says it's dry in 5 minutes, but no, it's not. It's dry in like 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. I spent a lot of time just holding shit, waiting for super glue to dry. Not anymore. Man, I don't know how I lived without this stuff before. Super glue accelerator. Again, hobby store's gonna have this. Brand, doesn't matter. This is Instaset, and it even has the Hobbytown logo on it. I think it's their own logo. Just get an aerosol bottle, and this is a little aerosol bottle. It comes in I also buy it in a I couldn't tell you the size of the bottle. It's a big fucking bottle of this stuff, and I just refill my bottle. I go through that stuff a lot. Super glue accelerator, the way to go. Trade secret right there. Super glue accelerator. Warning. It's alright. I just got super glue on my hands, right? It's drying now. But if I'd gotten super glue on accelerator on that causes a thermal reaction. There is a thermal chemical reaction between the super glue accelerator and the super glue. Meaning, I got super glue on my thumb, my index, and my middle finger. If I had got that super glue accelerator, they would feel like they are on fire right now. Oh man, that hurts. When you get super glue accelerator on skin where there's already super glue, that'll burn like a mother. Careful with that one. It's not a reason not to use it. Just be careful, kids. Super glue accelerator is definitely the way to go. But sometimes what you're gluing down isn't shaped right. It's too big. It doesn't fit. You need to maybe sand it down, right? Maybe some sandpaper. Sandpaper is a good thing to have, especially if you want to sand your joints before you paint them. What kind of sandpaper? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Sandpaper comes in different kinds of grits. So the higher the number, the more the softer it is, the smoother it is. The lower the number, the more harsh and gritty it is. Get a selection. That's kind of what's important. Get a wide selection. So you want a thicker grit, a bigger grit, to when you've really got to work something down, and then you want a fine grit to just like smooth something out. So get a like Home Depot or Lowe's will have a selection, like a pack of different grits all in one thing. So get a pack. I like a 300 for really fine grit, and then like a 150 for middle, and then I think maybe I have like a 50 that's like, it looks like gravel glued to paper. I don't ever use it, I don't think. 150 works a lot for what I need to do. Because I don't use sandpaper as much as I do a Dremel. These things are fantastic. I don't know how I ever lived without a Dremel. My best friend and I have had endless discussions on how we ever customized before we had a Dremel. This is my second Dremel. So you can buy Dremels that plug into walls. My first Dremel was a rechargeable battery. And that seems like a neat idea, and they're a lot cheaper than the ones you have to plug into the walls for the most part, until those batteries start to wear out, and it's got to recharge. And if you're doing a figure where you're doing a lot of dremeling, and you're waiting for your battery to recharge and you don't have a spare battery, if you've only got two, you only got one battery and you're waiting for it to recharge, it's a pain in the ass. And then that battery starts to wear out, doesn't last as long, and more importantly, it doesn't put out the power that that Dremel should. So I'm going to go ahead and say skip the Dremels that have rechargeable batteries, because you're going to get mad. You're going to figure out how useful the Dremel really is, and then you're going to get mad that you bought one with a rechargeable battery that you got to replace. So just outlay the cash and get a decent Dremel, one that plugs in. I have a variable. This is a variable speed. You want one that's variable speed. Go ahead and get one that's variable speed and plugs into the wall. My mom got this for me one Christmas. Oh man, geez, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and I'm still using it. So it's, clearly it's seen its better day, but you know what? It still works. The one that I had, the rechargeable battery, I think it lasted a year or two, maybe 2 years, maybe 2 years on the outside. But this one I've had for more than a decade, and it still works. You need a decent Dremel. You'll be surprised how frequently something doesn't fit, and you got a peg and it goes into this hole, but this hole's just this millimeter too small. It won't go in there. Oh, but if you hit it with the Dremel for 2 seconds, hey, now it fits perfectly. Or I'll Dremel my pouches. So like the Marauder Task Force stuff, it just pegs into the vest, which is fantastic when you're doing the modular stuff. But I buy like the Elite Force figures off of eBay for the vests and cannibalize those, and then I'll Dremel down the pouches, and then I'll glue those to the vests. And I need a Dremel for that. I can't do that with Sandpaper. You gotta have a Dremel for some of this stuff. And so, which kind of brings me to what parts do you need for a Dremel, or what attachments? I like these barrel sanders. This is probably the most frequently used piece I have. This it would probably tie for, I don't actually know what this is called. I call it, it looks like a little ball. And they come in, you can't even see here's 3 different sizes of those, and there's a 4th one, but I broke it. Trying to get the screen to focus on that, it doesn't want to. But it looks like a little ball. And I use those frequently to Dremel out things. Like if you buy custom heads, a lot of times you'll need to Dremel out the hole so they'll fit on the neck ball of your figure, or maybe it already has a hole in it but it's too small for the neck ball that you're going to use. Sometimes this shit just doesn't fit and you got to make it fit. So those are about the big pieces that you need for a Dremel. The other thing that you might want to get is like a cutting disc. So it's just a flat round thing that screws into like a piece, like the top of, not this particular piece, but it'll sit on a piece similar to this, and you'll use it for cutting things. I use that a lot in vehicle customs. I don't use it so much in figure customs, but I use it a lot when I do vehicle customs. And when you get a Dremel, a lot of times it will come with some of these parts, some of these accessories, and if it doesn't, right next to where your Dremel is, they'll sell any number of little toolboxes with a bunch of different pieces in there. So see what accessory kits are with next to the Dremels when you're looking at the Dremel. So you've Dremeled it down, you've superglued it on, you've superglued, accelerated it, maybe you've had to sand it down with your sandpaper. maybe you might need to trim it too. X-Acto knife. You're going to need an X-Acto knife. These things are fantastic. Careful with those. Any customizer that's been out there for any length of time will tell you how they've sliced open a finger with an X-Acto knife. I remember I cut the middle of my, I don't think I have the scar, I don't even remember where it was. Yeah, I think it was in the webbing of this finger. Probably about 2011, 2012, and it was deep. It needed stitches. But you know what? That's the nice thing about being a remote duty paramedic, and my roommate was a remote duty paramedic at the time as well. So we had our own suture kit. We had our own anesthetic. I just went up to my buddy and said, "Hey man, you want to do some stitches?" And he stitched me up. So I saved myself an emergency room visit by just having my buddy stitch me up, and I would have done the same for him. But for anybody that's not a remote duty paramedic, you're going to need to go to the ER if you got to get stitches. I actually recommend urgent care. You'd probably get it done a lot faster in urgent care than in an ER. Trade secret there as well. So maybe the part you want or the look that you want doesn't exist. Then what? Maybe you need to sculpt it then. I've got a buddy that Dayton Allen, who is from Sithfire Customs, and he sculpts all of his stuff, and it is just phenomenal. He's doing the aliens stuff right now. I mean, go look at Sithfire 30 on Facebook. I just can't say enough about how amazing his stuff is. So you may need to sculpt it. What do you need for sculpting? I use Av's Epoxy Sculpt. It's a 2-part system. Get a little part from part A and a little bit from part B. Work them together, and then it's a medium to sculpt with. I'm not very good at sculpting. It's not my forte. I can do a little bit if I need to, but I'm not really good. People sculpt hair, they sculpt faces, they sculpt heads. I've sculpted pouches before, like scarves, stuff like that, hats. I use it to fill in holes. So like on the Marauder vests, since these are modular, they've got a lot of holes for stuff to peg into. So like on my customs, I don't want those holes in there on the finished custom. So I'll sculpt in the holes so they're not visible. I'll do that before I paint it. The stuff, 2-part custom or part A, part B. It comes as one thing. You don't have to buy them separately. I'll link in the bottom. And it takes about 3 hours for it to dry. And I know that like if you let it set for a while, like an hour, and then work it a little after it's started to dry a little bit, sometimes it's easier and better to work with. This is just not something that I've ever really experimented with, and it will cure a little faster with heat. So like if I really want something to cure fast, I'll put a desk lamp over it to get it to dry faster. Let's see here. I do have something that I sculpted here. So, like her FBI logo, like they're supposed to be like Velcro on patches that go on her tactical vest. Those obviously don't exist. So I took a little bit of that sculpting medium, flattened it down, smoothed it out, let it dry a little bit, sculpted in some crevices and some folds, and then let it dry, and then primed it, painted. So that's sculpting stuff can come in very handy, and it's not very expensive. Again, that stuff has a shelf life too. It'll start to dry out, but it's usually like a couple of years. What else do you need that might be handy? Jeweler's screwdriver, Phillips head, especially if you're doing vintage G.I. Joes, the O-rings. You'll need to take them apart a lot of times. You need a good jeweler's screwdriver. A jeweler's screwdriver. You don't need a good one, but you need a jeweler's screwdriver, and it needs to be a Phillips head. That's a good piece to have. They're called hemostats. They're medical tools of the trade. I won't bother going into what I use hemostats for at work, but they're really handy for holding stuff. Like these are like these are great, and they are caked with primer. So what I'll do is I'll put my guy on a figure stand. I'll hold it with the hemostats, and then I'll prime it. So that's one of the things I use hemostats for. One of the other things I'll use hemostats for is to hold something while I paint it, like a head or a gun or pouches or vests or any number of whatever small thing that I need painted, that I need a really good control over it. I'll hold it with the hemostats. What else do we have here? Dental pick. These things are handy. They're really good for when you get into sculpting. I sculpt with dental picks. You can get those off of eBay. That's where I got mine. I actually bought a dental set for when I was working in Afghanistan. And then when I got home, my next couple of deployments, I didn't do dental stuff, so I didn't use them. So I put them in my customizing stuff. Maybe when you're done with your figure, you want to add something that you can't paint, like a design, like a unit patch or a cobra sigil. Then what do? Water slide decal. This is only something that I've recently gotten into. So here's Silver Cobra logos. Here's patches, 1/18 scale patches for common special forces units. Here's a big sheet of Cobra sigils. You can see the one I've cut out one there. That's the one. That's what I used on my Don Moreno Storm Shadow variant figure. You can get those from Bad Mother Customs, and he has an eBay shop. Link below, and I highly recommend his stuff. He does take commissions, so he's on Facebook. So if you need to get a commission from him, just hit him up and ask him what you want. See if he can get it for you. You can make your own water slide decals. It's not something I've tried. You can get that water slide paper at hobby stores, and if you've got a fairly decent printer and can resize the stuff, you can make your own water slide decals. I was going to look into it, but just never got around to it until Bad Mother Tattoos came along and solved my problem for me, which is one of the things I like to do, is make my problem somebody else's problem and make it easier for myself. Work smarter, not harder. So if you're going to do decals, water slide decals, I talked about this in the video for the Moray restoration. Having a nice pair of needle nose tweezers are fantastic, not only for applying labels or your stickers to your vintage vehicles, but they are almost a necessity for putting water slide decals on. If you're going to do the water slide decals, recommend the Micro Set, Micro Flat, and Micro Sol, and they're kind of decal softeners, decal setter, and then flat finish to put over it once it's done. They are, looks like I got them for about $4.50 a bottle at my local hobby store. I know they're on Amazon, link below, and they work really nice. For my water slide decals, these are called Iris scissors. They're just really fine, really sharp scissors, um, because the decals are so small on the paper that I have to cut one out. I'm not using a whole bunch at one time. Those are Iris scissors. They're specialty medical scissors. You can get those off at eBay. Just do a search for Iris scissors. They're fantastic. And maybe that's about it for this video. You know, that'll get you started on customizing. Yeah, I think that was about all the points that I really wanted to hit off the top. So if you're gonna customize and you want to build it, gotta make shit fit, right? Get a decent Dremel, wide selection of attachments for it, an X-Acto knife, some sandpaper. Maybe you need to sculpt it, so sculpt some stuff onto it. So Avs epoxy sculpt. Then you want to primer it once you've got it built. Maybe you need to glue shit to it. So Superglue, whatever Superglue you want to use, and then definitely Superglue accelerator. Then you want to prime it once it's built. Again, I like the Armory primer. Swear by this stuff. I will never use anything else. If they stop making it, I don't know what I'll do. Maybe I'll just stop customizing at that point, because I primer every figure I make. I primer every vehicle I make. I primer everything I make. I primer every gun I make. I customize. I primer everything. There's a reason for it. Primer makes paint stick. So once it's primered, then you paint it. There's any number of paints that you can use. Don't use enamel paint. Again, no enamel paint. Use acrylic paints. You can use stuff as cheap as Apple Barrel. Some people seem to get decent results with it. I don't like it. I think it's crappy paint. The Model Masters, Testers Model Masters, usually what people start out with. They have a wide selection of colors. For the most part, it's decent paint. You might have to water it down a little bit while you're using it. And it does tend to dry out in the jar, which is one of the reasons I don't use it anymore. Games Workshop, for my money, is where it's at. Just very versatile paint. They have different types of paint, like washes and dry brush paints and airbrush paint. So it's a very versatile system of paints, and they have a lot of the colors that I like. And then Tamiya paints for like more realistic camouflage colors, military colors, and the fact that it'll run through an airbrush, straight through an airbrush. And you know, that's another thing that you can get into, is getting an airbrush. Not going to go into that today. And water slide decals, and if you're going to do water slide decals, check out Bad Mother Tattoo, and then get some of the stuff to help the decals soften up to form to your figure, and to get them to set, to dry properly, to stick to your figure. And then you can seal it. Again, sealant's not something I do. You'll have to ask somebody else about that. The Armory makes a sealer. That was the matte sealer that I used, but eventually I ended up not liking the finish. And that's like customizing 101. Oh, paint stirrer for the Tamiya paint. Sandpaper, Superglue accelerator, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's about it. That's customizing 101. That's what you need to get started. If you've got any comments, questions, sound off below in the comment section. I'm always happy to answer questions. Tips and tricks, if you'd like to throw out your own tips and tricks, that's what we're here for, sharing information. Go ahead and throw out some tips, personal tips that you found that you like. So like the video, share the video, follow the channel, you know, the usual YouTube stuff, shameless self-promotion, right? And share the video, and again, always suggestions for more videos. thank you for watching Go Figure Customs YouTube channel. I hope this helps.